Street, it becomes very clear that this is a vibrant, growing community. Impressive public buildings, thriving businesses, hundreds of newly built residential homes. But look around and you will see that Newmarket is also a town that is firmly rooted in history. In fact, Newmarket's prosperity can be traced back to its earliest beginnings, to the settlers who braved many hardships to conquer endless forests and carve out a successful living for themselves. These pioneers are long gone now, as are most of their stories of daily life. However, we are fortunate in having a varied and tangible record of their time among us. Built heritage, houses, churches, public buildings remain from virtually every era since the founding of Newmarket. These buildings and structures can still be found scattered throughout the town, quietly surviving in many different states of repair. Some remain virtually unchanged since the day they were built, while others have suffered the ravages of neglect over time. Some have been lovingly restored, while others have been muddled beyond recognition. Many are gone, the victims of a community's changing needs. By visiting some of these sites, we can gain a deeper understanding of Newmarket's past, about the characters who shaped it, and about the events that affected them, for ultimately, this also affects each of us. Our story begins in the year 1800. Yonge Street, which had been blazed in 1793 under the direction of John Graves Simcoe, was still only a rough trail. In order to encourage the clearing and maintenance of a road, which he considered to be a prime military route, Simcoe had offered free land grants to settlers along Yonge Street. In return for the land, each settler had to agree to erect a home and clear a portion of the forest, including their frontage on Yonge Street. He had particularly encouraged people with wilderness experience, such as the Quakers. Their industrious nature was almost legendary. In response to this offer, in the year 1800, Timothy Rogers acquired a grant for 40 farms of 200 acres each and promised to bring enough families to settle on these lands. Rogers was a Quaker, a member of the Society of Friends, and a millwright from Vermont. His experience led him to choose the fertile but still forested lands of Whitchurch and King townships, in part bisected by the Holland River. These are the lots in which the present town of Newmarket is located. Timothy Rogers' diary helps us to pinpoint the time when the first migration of settlers into Newmarket began. By the spring of 1801, a number of homes had been constructed, and the forest began to recede.
Of course, the first thing they did was clear the land and of the forest and the trees, and build themselves a habitation and try to derive a livelihood by the cleared land. In taking down all the trees, it was mainly deciduous. It was a good area because they were nearly all deciduous trees, elm, maple, and hardwood, with a sprinkling of fir trees and the softwoods. In order to turn them into lumber, of course, the prime requirement was the means of doing that. Very soon they gravitated to the Main Street, which is just at that time just an Indian trail starting from what is now Water Street, Water and Main, and a few settlements or a few buildings were built along there.
These first homes were typically log structures of shanties, a necessary expedient until a more permanent and substantial home could be raised. Few, if any, of these structures exist today, though some are reputed to have been incorporated into later buildings. By the winter of 1801, the waters of the Holland River were dammed up to provide power for a grist mill. Joseph Hill, a miller who had arrived with Rogers' first group of settlers, also built a fine wooden residence and store adjacent to his mill. This mill site, located just south of the present-day intersection of Main and Water Streets, became the center of commerce around which settlement began. It had been carefully chosen by Hill because it was an ancient crossing point which had been used for centuries by the Aboriginal people. From this point, where the river narrowed and dropped, a trail headed northwards following the course of the river towards Lake Simcoe. Since most of the early inhabitants in the Newmarket area were Quakers, they brought with them well-established traditions, including their approach to architecture. The basic tenet that form must follow function is clearly evident in the few remaining buildings from the turn of the 19th century. Their choice of building design and material also was governed by familiarity. Virtually all houses and structures were constructed of wood. This was in keeping with the tradition in the United States, which they had so recently chosen to leave. The Quaker Meeting House, which is located on Yonge Street, was built in 1810 on land donated by Asa Rogers. Before its construction, the Friends had met in their own homes, but by 1808 they needed a larger place of worship. Shortly thereafter, the money was raised and a 30 by 60-foot building was erected. The exterior is in the unadorned architecture approved by the Society. Simple gable roof with a veranda along the south side. The board and batten siding, like the rest of the building, is hewn from thick pine slabs. Access to the interior is gained by two doors, one for men, one for women, as their business sessions were conducted separately. This remarkable building remains virtually unchanged since its construction and is still used as a meeting house by the Quakers. The interior is divided up into two sections for men and women with a partition in between. Some original features include the window sash, benches, and an early wood stove which would have heated the room. In 1976, a restoration project was undertaken to keep this locally significant landmark in prime condition. Immediately south of the meeting house lies the burying ground, where lie the remains of many of Newmarket's pioneers. Any resident of the town will recognize names such as Rogers, Botsford, Millard, Lundy, Doane, Gorham, Srigley, and Davis. Located on the west side of Leslie Street near Mulock Drive is the John Bogart House. This two-story frame house was constructed in 1811. Bogart was a miller who arrived in Upper Canada from Pennsylvania in 1802. On his grant of 200 acres, he erected a sawmill and a grist mill, harnessing the power of the creek that was adjacent to his home. This house, which was Bogart's second on the site, illustrates once again the simple architecture favored by the Quakers, gable roof and clapboard siding. At the rear of the house is a brick addition, which is thought to be an original or a very early wing. The mill pond can still be seen immediately to the south of the house. By the end of the first decade of the 19th century, Newmarket, as it was already being called, had become a thriving trade center. A number of homes and businesses had cropped up around Joseph Hill's mill site. One would hardly suspect that Hill's fine wooden residence, which had been the social center of town and visited by so many early dignitaries, would lie beneath the exterior of this greatly modified building. In the year 1855, this ancient structure was moved a few hundred feet to the southwest and is presently located at 440 Eagle Street. Despite its many alterations, this house, which may have been constructed as early as the year 1801, merits recognition as the town's oldest building, the one around which all of Newmarket developed. It is due to the efforts of the early Quaker pioneers like Joseph Hill, John Bogart, and those first 40 families that Newmarket gained recognition as a productive and desirable area in which to settle. Today, very few of these earliest structures remain. Because of their great age and historical connection to Newmarket's past, it is vital that each one be preserved and protected as our legacy.
One of the necessities of pioneer life when travel was so difficult was the local inn. It is recorded that Yonge Street had almost one inn for every mile of its length. The earliest recorded tavern within the boundaries of early Newmarket was Dye's Inn, located at 471 Eagle Street. This large building was already in operation in the year 1822, though it was possibly constructed earlier than this. Its prominent location near to the mill centre and close to Yonge Street made it a popular destination. The fenced-in stables for the tavern were located directly south of the building, where Eagle Street curves towards Main Street. Its present vinyl siding covers an earlier rough cast or stucco exterior. The front veranda is gone now. It is on this site that Newmarket's first homicide was committed. In the spring of 1819, David Cummings shot and killed Robert Selby of Sharn, who was passing by on his horse. It is to Dye's Inn that the first stagecoaches arrived in the late 1820s. Passengers, as well as His Majesty's mail, would leave York at 12 noon and arrive at 9 p.m. that evening in Newmarket. The regular schedule of the stagecoaches was made possible by the continued improvement in the condition of Yonge Street. This also encouraged more and more settlers to adopt Newmarket as their home. By the late 1820s, it had been described as a post town consisting of about 14 houses, a blacksmith, a hatter, a shoemaker, with a mill near at hand. One of the cornerstones of this fledgling community would have been the trading post operated by John Cothra. He was the son of a wealthy York merchant and became very prosperous himself through his fur trade and mercantile business in Newmarket. The home he constructed in the 1820s was located on the corner of Water and Main Streets. In the late 1830s or early 1840s, Cothra replaced his original house with the present brick building. This remains one of the earliest brick structures in Newmarket. Its size and quality bespeaks of Cothra's prominence in the community. The 4 large chimneys, which would have served cooking and heating purposes, are still evident today, as is the location of its original front portico. John Cothra also operated Newmarket's first bank from his home.
Throughout the second quarter of the 19th century, Newmarket experienced steady growth, which required the skills of many tradesmen. Their homes reflected a growing awareness of social status and local prominence. Located at 445 Botsford Street is the Timothy Millard home. Millard arrived in 1805 as one of Timothy Rogers' first 40 families. He brought with him millstones to be used in a local grist mill. His home, which was constructed around 1835, sits on a rise just west of Main Street. Underneath the modern siding lies a brick structure with end parapet walls, a feature found on a number of early brick buildings in Newmarket. In this 19th century photo, It is clearly evident that the architecture of Millart's home reflects his important social position in the community. Also of note is the positioning of additions and outbuildings, which was a common feature of many in-town lots. Outhouses, woodsheds, and summer kitchens were the necessities of every home, a fact that we often overlook today when viewing the cluttered appearance of such fenced-in properties. Seen again on the right side of this photo, the prominent location of this home is emphasized by its proximity to another locally significant building known as Liberty Hall. Like its neighbor, Liberty Hall was constructed in the 1830s. James B. Caldwell, a chairmaker and painter, chose this site for his home because it was close to the center of the growing business community on Main Street, where his shop was located. Respected in the community, Caldwell played an important role as a liaison for the locals who were imprisoned in the building directly south of his home in the aftermath of the 1837 rebellion. It is from his actions at that time that the home was dubbed Liberty Hall. The simplicity of the Georgian architecture is still evident in the symmetrical placement of windows and chimneys over a stucco exterior. The removal of its earlier bell-cast veranda gives this home a more vertical presence today. It is the only property in Newmarket which has an interior designated feature. There is a family crest and a portrait of a dog, which were painted onto one of the original plaster walls, perhaps by an early itinerant artist.
In the year 1853, an event took place which was to change Newmarket forever. It was in June of that year that the Ontario, Huron and Simcoe Railway reached the town. It heralded the end of the stagecoach days. Not only could people now travel quickly and comfortably from Toronto to Newmarket, but local produce could be transported quickly and economically to the city. While communities bypassed by the railroad soon began to wither away, Newmarket experienced a major population boom. The changes were unmistakable and rapid. The Forsyth House, a major stopping point for the stagecoach, was renamed the Railroad Hotel. Industries sprang up all around the railway station on Huron Street, now called Davis Drive. The present railway station, still on Davis Drive, was constructed in the year 1900 and replaced the original one from the 1850s. Seen in this circa 1910 photo, this stick-style frame building has changed very little. Recently, the Chamber of Commerce set up its offices in the station and has undertaken extensive rehabilitation of the exterior. It was the growth brought by the railroad which gave a significant boost to the development of Newmarket's Main Street.
Viewing Main Street from this modern perspective, it is difficult to imagine the many changes that have taken place in the last 200 years. In fact, even within the last few decades, Main Street's role within Newmarket has been redefined. Rapid urban growth and changes in transportation patterns have contributed to the development of a number of areas of commerce within Newmarket's boundaries. Even with the popularity of malls and big box plazas, Main Street continues to offer a viable alternative to local residents. Much of the present-day Main Street, particularly south of the Christian Church, has changed very little since the mid-19th century. Previously, numerous dwellings and businesses had sprung up along the ancient trail that followed the Holland River. This was the commercial center of the developing village. This early photo image of Main Street in the 1850s shows a surprising number of inns, shops, and homes adjoining each other. Most of these buildings were of wooden construction. Fire was a constant hazard.
Fire was a great menace and a terrible hazard to the district because, as you can imagine, being all wood buildings, and a least little spark would start off a conflagration with disastrous results. And this happened, and many, from time to time, both on the east side and on the west side. Now, to document it all, I did prepare what they call an occasional paper on the fire brigade, and that lists all the occasions of the different fires. And of course, a fire in its beginning is a disaster, you know, a terrible thing. But then, as it evolves, why it sometimes proves to be a kind of a step forward, because one step backwards and 2 steps forward is sort of the way it goes. So eventually, by coincidence, there was a brickyard that started up on the east side of town, over just off Prospect Street, and there was I guess one of the worst fires was in 1862, and by rebuilding after the fire, they stipulated that everything should be brick, you know, non-combustible. So consequently, we find that at every fire or disaster, replacement was by brick, yeah. And they were, the brick wasn't that good quality. It was kind of soft brick. It wasn't hard burned brick, but nevertheless, it was fireproof. And each one of the new stores, some of them were 2 and 3 stories high, and each unit was separated by firewalls with double thicknesses, and very thick too. You know, like for instance, Elman Campbell built when he built his store and remodeled the interior. Come to find out that on either side there were double brick walls with a space between, so that between each unit it was about 2 feet. You know, wow. 2 feet of masonry. So you see, a fire would be quite retarded in going through a block of buildings.
Major fires swept along Main Street in 1862, 1871, and 1875. As a result, none of the pre-1862 wooden buildings now exist. Little time was wasted in rebuilding burnt-out businesses and homes. In order to combat the threat of fire, brick was used instead of wood. In fact, by 1893, a bylaw was passed prohibiting the use of wood frame construction on Main Street. Most of these buildings are still standing and made of solid brick with internal separating firewalls between